All she did was ask a question, and a woke corporation fired her for her faith. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard, and this is First Liberty Live. Before we get started, I just want to thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It is so helpful to this program to get to new people who are also interested in the things we talk about. So thank you in advance for that, and especially thank you for sharing ones like this one. We have a significant case that just launched, and I want to share with you what happened to Lacey Smith. Lacey Smith loved being a flight attendant. The job was a perfect fit for her personality and her faith.
I mean, there's of course adventure that's a part of it. There were so many places that I got to explore that I wouldn't have otherwise. And in the same way, that's the same thing with the people, right? You just have so many different people. And so just kind of being there and serving in a way, when you think of, you know, Jesus and the servant leadership, just being able to serve in a way that just met their need where they were at.
She worked for Alaska Airlines, a woke corporation, so she was not surprised when a notice appeared on an employee-only page.
So it just caught my eye because they had just posted it, and the title was Alaska Supports the Equality Act.
H.R. 5, the Equality Act?
That is a deceptively named bill in Congress. The large print may trumpet equality, but the fine print destroys important legal protections for people of faith.
What we're seeing now in the name of equality for people is equality for some, right? That it's believe what I want you to believe or you're canceled.
So she posted a comment.
As a company, do you think it's possible to regulate morality?
And that's all she wrote, but there was a great deal of thought behind it.
In terms of regulating morality, laws are all about regulation. That's what they do. We're regulating behavior. Morality, when you break it down, is just what is right? What is wrong, the idea behind that. As a Christian, my morality comes from God.
She says first the airline wrote a response to her comment. Then they deleted it. Then they paused her work schedule. Then there was a meeting. Then they fired her for her faith.
They said that by my asking the question, I was such a bad person that it merited firing me from my job. And I think that that's the hard part about it, that, you know, like, what do people get fired for, right? Like, they get fired for being, you know, not caring, incompetent, lazy, whatever. And mine had nothing to do with performance. It had everything to do with my character. And that's what they fired me for, that they said my character was so bad that I shouldn't work there anymore.
And the ultimate irony, what Alaska Airlines did perfectly illustrates why Lacey had questions about the so-called Equality Act.
I have the freedom to be who I want, unless apparently I work for Alaska Airlines. And then all of a sudden I no longer have the freedom to be who I am, because in order to keep my job, I now have to agree with everything that the company is saying and doing. When we are determined about things, and when we make up our mind about something, when we know that we know that we know, I think that it allows us that courage.
Here's what you need to know. Alaska Airlines engaged in blatant discrimination against Lacey Smith. Alaska's actions violate both federal and state civil rights laws for firing Lacey because of her religious beliefs. This case is critically important to Lacey, but you know what? It's also critically important to millions of Americans who work in corporate America, who are faced with corporate wokeism and being subject to being canceled because of their religious beliefs. In America, discrimination doesn't fly.
We'll have Lacey here to join us in just a few moments, but first we're going to talk to David Hacker, who's one of the attorneys on the case. Hi, David.
How you doing, Stuart?
You're going to be representing her, as well as Jeff Mateer that we just saw in that video. The two of you are teaming up on this one. Tell us about this. Most people hear this story, and the first thing they ask is, can they do that? Can you fire somebody for asking a question?
Well, you wouldn't think so, not in America at least, but here we've got Alaska Airlines, a woke corporation who's basically telling its employees, if you're religious, you don't belong here and we don't want you here. And that makes a mockery of our federal civil rights laws.
And Lacey's not the only person they fired. We have another client we're also representing. What can you tell us about her?
That's right. We also represent a second flight attendant who also simply expressed her opinions about the Equality Act when Alaska Airlines invited employees to do that.
We've been warning people about the so-called Equality Act for many months. It is a controversial bit of legislation. It's passed the House. It's not moved through the Senate at this point anyway. And it should be no surprise to any corporation. It's controversial enough that they shouldn't be surprised that people hold different opinions about it, that they have points of view about it. One thing it does, for example, is it completely removes any defense under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which would be problematic for people of any faith anywhere in the country, that would take away that opportunity for a defense. But the key here is this. Americans have the right to hold and express an opinion, especially one that derives from their faith, without fearing for their jobs.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You know, the federal civil rights laws protect Americans from religious discrimination and hostile work environments that would, you know, make them feel excluded in the workplace. And so what Alaska has done is completely ignored those laws.
Now, to be clear, some people will hear this and they'll go, what about the First Amendment? But it's not a First Amendment case because it involves a private corporation.
That's right. It actually involves the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which protects religious Americans in the workplace from any sort of discrimination by their employer.
All right. This is different than many cases we go after in that the first step is not to file in a court, but actually to file with the federal agency. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so what we did is we filed what's called a charge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, commonly known as the EEOC.
Yeah.
And that charge asks the agency to look into this matter, do an investigation, and ultimately it can bring its own lawsuit. It can decide not to bring a lawsuit. It can refer the matter back to us, in which case we will file a lawsuit for Lacey and this other flight attendant.
In the past, how have they handled this kind of case?
Just a few years ago, they actually took a religious discrimination case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the court ruled in favor of religious liberty. So we're hopeful that the EEOC will do the right thing here as well.
And this is about far more than two employees who got fired. This is really about the freedom of conscience, the freedom of religion for people of faith who work for woke corporations all over the country.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if we can't believe things and express those to our peers at work, then I don't know what country we live in. But thankfully, we have federal laws that protect the ability of employees to be free from this kind of discrimination and hostile environment.
One thing I want to point out, as people heard the story, the company invited comment. I mean, it was on an employee-only page. It's it's a portal that you only get to if you're an employee. But it was set up to say, you know, let us know what you think, ask a question or make a comment. So they invited the very comment that they then objected to.
Yeah, imagine if you were at the proverbial water cooler at work talking with your peers about an issue, something that's happening in the culture today, and then your boss turned around and fired you for it. That's pretty much what's happened here to Lacey Smith and our other client.
All right. So what's the next step in this? You gave a hint at that, but what happens next? How does it proceed?
Right. So we are waiting for the EEOC to start its investigation, and you know that's a process that takes some time, but we are prepared to do whatever it takes to protect Lacey's rights.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to share?
You know, I think this is just a really important case because it's not something that a lot of Americans think of. They do have religious liberty at work, and it's something where if they are in a situation where they've been discriminated against for their faith at work, they need to let us know at firstliberty.org.
Yeah. Now, we've got Lacey Smith here with us. I want to introduce her to you. Come on in, Lacey. We saved a seat for you. Appreciate your making time for us today. I'm glad that you're here to share.
It's my honor.
People hear about this, and I mean, and their first concern is for you because you lost your job over this. And we talked about this when I was up visiting with you in Portland, and you even mentioned that as you were typing it in, you were thinking, well, at most, they might delete it, right?
Right.
Yeah, tell me about that moment.
Yeah, I mean, people keep asking me now that they've heard the story if there's some sort of catch to it because it seems so absurd that I could just ask a question and lose my job for it. There seems like there's got to be something else going on.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's not. Like, that's the whole point of this, is that Alaska, in their forum, as a company where they're inviting comments from everybody else, I just asked a question based on my own religious convictions, and I ended up being fired for it.
Yeah. What's it like in that moment when you're hearing the final word that you don't work here anymore? What went through your head?
I mean, there's disbelief in the moment. Unfortunately, I feel like there's a lot going on in the nation right now, so I'd like to say that it's just complete and utter disbelief, but with everything going on, I feel like it's just par for the course at this point, which is the tragedy in it all.
Yeah. Now, the word that keeps coming to mind as we've talked about it here among us at First Liberty is the theme through all of this is courage. You've demonstrated a bit of courage in not only expressing an opinion based on your faith, but also in standing up to a big corporation the way that you're doing. Most people are not willing to do that. They're not willing to say anything if they work for a woke corporation and suddenly that corporation takes a position on a political issue, a bit of legislation or something, that's at odds with their faith. They're not going to speak up for that. Why is it important for people in that moment to really stop and consider where they are in time and the place we are in history and be willing to speak up for what they believe?
Yeah, I think about when people talk about when you're just 1 degree off, how over time, how much that really misses the mark. And I feel like this is one of those moments where people might look at it and think, oh, well, it's just a little something. It's just, we're just 1 degree off. But over time, and what we see in history is so much concern for posterity, for the people coming in behind us. So not only is it super relevant and it's really affecting us here today, even though some people might not be acknowledging that, but there's a real reason why people won't speak up. It's a tragedy to lose your job, to have to figure out another way to actually earn income. But if we don't do something now, if we don't actually say anything, only time will tell how big that degree is currently and how far off we will be from liberties, from freedom, from being able to have an opinion that might just differ from anybody else.
Yeah. And the word that comes up is courage, but there's another word that goes right with that, and that's encouragement, because you're in the middle of this. You can use a lot of encouragement. David, I want to give you a chance to just offer some encouragement to Lacey. What would you say to her as she goes through this fight?
Well, I'm just so thankful that she was willing to take a stand and show these woke corporations that they can't push religious Americans around. And, we're here for her and with her till the end of the fight.
Yeah, there are a lot of people cheering for you.
Thank you.
And we will undoubtedly talk to you again as we go through this process. But again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your courage to speak up for what you believe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it is our honor to represent you, and I just want you to know that. Hey, we have set up a special page on our website where you can learn more about this case. If you go to firstliberty.org, there's a pop-up right now as we do this particular video that will take you to that page. If you come along later, there's a link in the text that goes along with this video where you can link to that page. You can learn more detail about it, and there's also a one-page resource that explains basically the ins and outs of the law when it comes to this kind of situation, so you can get an idea what's right and what's wrong and what is proper. It also gives you a chance to talk about it with knowledge, so if it comes up in your church small group or something, you can be the one person who says, I know all about this, and you can share on that. So look for that link and download that resource, and we will see you next time right here on First Liberty Live.